This is a broadcast from the Pop Cult Pod.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location in Ireland, known as the Pop Cult Compound, where the craze for film, television, video games, and much, much more. A proud part of the Phoenix Wrestling Network comes the Pop Cult Pod, the only podcast with an actual cult following, hosted by your cult leader, Tompott.
That theme is way more badass than the show is. Welcome to the Pop Cult Pod. I am your cult leader, Tompott, the bad boy of the Phoenix Wrestling Network. I'm just going to start claiming titles here before someone else comes in case fucking Raven Creed is like, I'm the bad one on the network. Nope, it's mine now. I was going to say fight me for it, but no, that won't end well for me. Yeah, that's probably the first thing I should address. The Phoenix Wrestling Network. This is the first episode on the Phoenix Wrestling Network, which is totally unbelievable. I'm so happy to be a part of this. I've known the Phoenix guys for a while now. I'd be supporting them regardless. I love the podcast they've put out so far. And it's an amazing thing to be a part of. Can't wait to see what the future holds. If this is your first podcast from the Pop Cult Pod, welcome. I hope you enjoy it. It's pretty clear cut what we're going to do. We're going to talk film, television, video games, pop culture in general. I'm not going to lie. It's not a very deep podcast, believe it or not. It does what it says in the tin. It's the Ron Seal of podcasts. Taking that title as well. If this isn't your first episode, you might notice a few minor changes, but nothing major. Maybe you'll even find it better. But hey, I don't want to slander my old podcast episodes, which, if you are curious, you can check out the back catalogue, soundcloud.com/popcultpod. But hey, Phoenix Wrestling is a new home of the Pop Cult Pod. And I think, let's get started on the right foot. You might say this isn't a wrestling podcast. You're kind of right. But I will say this. I have a very special wrestling-related guest for my very first episode, which we will get to at the very end. I'm not going to say who it is, because I want you to listen it through. But I will say that Teddy Long was very excited about it. That's all I'm going to say. And I think we should also, let's just get to know each other. It's a first date. You want to get to know the person you're dealing with. Make sure they're not a psycho, a serial killer, a cult leader. So we're going to do a few questions. That's right. Not a bother podcast. You talked about cults on your podcast, and now I'm taking questions, huh? You steal from me, I steal from you. All right? So this comes from mantelligence.com. Yeah, I use the same website as well. Oh, I'm very quickly making enemies with everyone on the podcast network, but hey, that's how it goes. Right, 63 icebreaker questions. I'm not going to do 63. I'll do a few and then get pretty bored. Right, first question. If you could live in any sitcom, which one would it be? Right, this is a question that comes up often. Here's the problem with it. People think that you're just, like, if you live in that sitcom world, it doesn't really make you part of it. Like, if you're saying, oh, I want to be in Friends, you're not going to be hanging around with the guys. You're just going to be living in New York. Go do that. That's something you can do. If you pick Seinfeld, you're not going to be kicking down Jerry's door, raiding his fridge. So I think you need to do something that has a good setup. You can't just go for a good sitcom that seems fun. I think it's either, if it's animated, maybe Futurama, because you get to go to the future, and it looked pretty cushy. I mean, it was a bit dark, but pretty cushy living. Or maybe even go back in time, go to that 70s show. Because I actually feel like, even though I would just be, I guess, in school, or maybe I'd just be 27, and then I'd be like way older in the cast, and that'd be kind of weird. I could, get your ass kicked by Red Foreman, share beer, and I might know. All right, next question. What was in your high school locker? Books. No, nerds, am I right? No, thankfully not, then I would have been in one. Your high school locker, I mean books, yeah. High school lockers are pretty boring in Ireland. They must be more exciting in America, but I don't know. If you had your own talk show, who would your first 3 guests be? The Not a Bother lads, of course. See, corporate synergy, and I've mended bridges there. If a movie was being made of your life, and you could choose the actor or actor to play you, who would you choose and why? I'm going to go with Leonardo DiCaprio. He looks nothing like me. But, hey, he doesn't take many roles, so it's going to be a good movie if he's in it, I guess. And he can do a lot of shouting, which is kind of my MO. So, hey, why not? What is the scariest thing you've ever done for fun? Start a podcast. I've had a very sheltered existence. If you can instantly become an expert in something, what would it be? It's kind of scary that the first thought that came to my head was demolition expert. But I don't know what I would do with that, or why would I want that. I should really delete that. I'm going to get a knock on my door from the police. I'm just going to stop there before I incriminate myself any further. So hopefully that gives you some insight into who you're dealing with here. But before I say anything else that could incriminate me, let's get on to the news, which around here we call the new news.
Not just news. Not just new news.
You've got mail.
But the new.
That was the new news theme. That's not confusing at all. New. Yeah, he's still saying news to this day. He never got it finished, unfortunately. But yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is the news that we're going to be dealing with. Some of the best news, the biggest news that came out in the last few weeks. It's actually been pretty quiet since I did my last episode. Last episode we had like Spider-Man, which was a crazy amount of news. This one has been pretty quiet, but we'll go with some of the big stories. First of all, since we were last recording, we've had TIFF, not just an abbreviation for the name Tiffany, the Toronto International Film Festival. I'm not going to talk about every movie because that would be a tedious chore, which you'll explain. That's a reference before I've even referred to the reference. Does that make sense? Nope, it shouldn't. We have 8 films I'm going to talk about. No, 6. I'll talk about 6. First off, we had Knives Out. This is Rian Johnson's new film, of course, the director of The Last Jedi, which I think they scared him off the internet. People are trying to burn him at the stake, I believe. But hey, they have Knives Out for him. Well, this Knives Out film has 100% currently on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty good. I'm going to use Rotten Tomatoes scores, and I know people are going to be like, oh, Rotten Tomatoes doesn't matter, it's stupid. Look, I get it. It's just a general indication of the positivity surrounding the movie. This is basically a murder mystery. It has an amazing cast, including Chris Evans, Daniel Craig, Michael Shannon, Jamie Lee Curtis, just to name a few. And it's like it's like a murder mystery. It's comedy. It seems like a throwback to a 70s murder mystery movie. And wouldn't you know it, the consensus on Rotten Tomatoes says, it Knives Out sharpens the old murder mystery tropes with a keenly assembled suspense outing that makes brilliant use of writer-director Rian Johnson's stellar ensemble. That's pretty much all I've heard. I've heard really positive. This might be actually, surprisingly, the most positive reception I've heard of from Toronto overall. Now, I will say this as well. We talked a little bit, I think, about Venice last episode, or at least we talked about Joker's reaction to Venice. The Toronto International Film Festival is a bit more general. It's not as high society. You know, in general, people can just go to it. Audiences can go to it. It's not as critical or fancy, I will say. And that's not dissing Toronto. That's just the way it is, as we will see as we go through this list. In fact, speaking of Joker, which of course was lauded, and I think it won the Golden Lion at Venice, it got a few more barbs thrown at it here. And I don't know if that's an indication of American audiences versus European audiences, or whether this is a bit overblown, the reaction to this. But we will see. It's really not that far out now. If there was a loser of the Toronto International Film Festival, this must be it. The Goldfinch. Okay. I actually named this in my first ever episode, and I talked about films that could be going for Oscars this year. Wah, wah. Right. The reason I thought that was because it's based on the book by Donna Tartt. This is a massive book. I was actually working at a bookshop when this came out, and I had to sell people this book. And it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. The thing is, a lot of people that read it, it was a bit polarizing. People thought it was like, you know, a dumb person's idea of an intelligent book, basically. She kind of has apparently a nice way of writing, but the structure and story is often all over the place, Donna Tartt. I think her most famous one beside that is Secret History, but this movie follows a young man whose troubled childhood leads him to the world of art forgery after his mother died in a terrorist bomb attack. During this time in the museum, while taking interest in a painting called The Goldfinch, in which he attempts to recover it from being stolen. I don't know if that made any sense when I read it out. I got bored halfway through. This movie currently stands, drum roll please, at 25% on Rotten Tomatoes. Woo! Now here's the thing about that. It's already on release in America. It came out this weekend. And yeah, it's been absolutely ravaged critically. The saddest thing about this is you saw the cast at Toronto and they all just looked like, oh God, get us out of here. It was the most depressing cast from what I've ever seen. Now, why did this movie fail? Critically, I mean, you know, I don't know if we can talk about why it failed critically. There's loads of issues apparently. Commercially though, it just bombed really hard. This had the 6th worst opening ever for a film, opening in over 2,500 cinemas, which is generally just a large opening, is what that's considered. It took in less than 3 million on a budget of 45 million, and normally with a budget including, I don't know if this film has really been marketed, to be honest with you. It had a trailer, but the general consensus to the trailer was I don't know, a little bit about from being a thing, but if you didn't know that, you wouldn't have got anything out of it. So yeah, The Finch is dead on arrival. don't think it'll be getting any Oscar love. The only thing it might get attention or consideration for it could be cinematography. Roger Deakins, I believe, does cinematography. Who's a very good cinematographer, so maybe he'll get something for that. But in general, not a good look for the Goldfinch. My favourite review was the first review I saw for this from Lider, which just said not in the title, not in the body of the review, it just said or, which is what it sounds like. There's nothing worse than an arty film that fails, and this seems to be that. One film that hasn't failed though is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. This comes from Marielle Heller, who gave us Can You Ever Forgive Me last year with Ms. McCarthy. This is the Mr. Rogers movie. Of course, if you didn't see it last year, there was a documentary. What was it called? Won't You Be My Neighbor? That was fantastic about him. And I think a lot of people are more worried that it's going to sort of cross over and be quite similar. But from my understanding, at least, it's not exactly like that. It's not just a straightforward biopic, which is good. Anyway, the plot synopsis we have is an award-winning cynical journalist, Lloyd Vogel, grudgingly accepts an assignment to write an Esquire profile of the beloved television icon Fred Rogers, played by Tom Hanks. Vogel's perspective on life is transformed after his encounter with Rogers. Currently sitting at 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the consensus is much like the beloved TV personality inspired, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood offers a powerfully affecting message about acceptance and understanding. Tom Hanks is obviously great in it. Now, here's my concern is probably a strong word. I don't really have anything invested in this movie because, of course, Mr. Rogers wasn't a big deal to Irish people anyway, of which I am one of them. Even though I did quite like the documentary that came out last year, to be honest. The thing I'm kind of skeptical about is that anytime I see a film that's only being really propped up by it's a great performance, it kind of makes me wonder if the actual film is any good. A good performance can save a bad movie, but it doesn't make the movie any better, you know? I didn't really like Heller's last film. Can You Ever Forgive Me? I thought it was quite dry and boring. And, you know, Tom Hanks is America's dad. Everyone loves him. And people love Mr. Rogers. So they kind of are going to love this if it's a great portrayal of you know, by Tom Hanks of a person they love. So I wonder if that's going to be, you know, a universal truth. Especially people who don't know Mr. Rogers. I don't know. Anyway, that's not like it's a big deal. I'm looking forward to it. Reviews are positive, not to take away from it. But hey, that's the cynical side of me. Jojo Rabbit is another film that debuted actually. This like a few of these films might have performed elsewhere. Jojo Rabbit, this was the debut for it. This is Taika Waititi's latest film, of course. Hunt for the Wilder People and Thor Ragnarok. Let's go into the synopsis first, and then we'll talk a bit about this one because it's pretty interesting. During World War II, lonely German boy Jojo Rabbit Betzler has his worldview turned upside down when he discovers that his single mother Rosie, played by Scarlett Johansson, is hiding a young Jewish girl in their attic. Aided only by his imaginary friend in the form of an idiotic version of Adolf Hitler, played by Taika Waititi, Jojo must confront his ideology. Now, I'm really looking forward to this film. I like Taika Waititi a lot. I think he's very funny. This is obviously a satire, and it's made that very clear from the marketing. I think they market it as an anti-hate satire, I think they're calling it. It's getting... okay. I've heard generally positive reviews. At 73% Rotten Tomatoes, okay? I think it might be a bit lower on Metacritic, but that tends to be the case. I've heard a lot of people that are kind of against or really having issues with its portrayal of Nazis. But I'm not sure what that means. I don't know, as the people just saying, you can't play Nazis as humorous, but it's a satire. You know, people aren't going to say, oh, those goofy Nazis. I don't think, like, it's clearly showing what they did is bad, right? And I haven't seen it, obviously, but does it? I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I don't know. It's like Mel Brooks would have done a film like this, and I do wonder what the reaction is going to be to that kind of film in this day and age. I don't know, is it people just being a bit too overly PC, where their age is justified? I'm not sure. I would assume it would be the former, but I don't know. I did see people up in arms as soon as the trailer came out, because they're like, "Oh, you're playing Hitler as funny. How dare you?" Even though Hitler's been a source of comedy for, you know, decades now. Hell, Hitler was a source of comedy when Charlie Chaplin was around, and Hitler was still alive. I don't know though. I mean, if you're going to disrespect Hitler, having, you know, a Maori, I believe, I think Taika Waititi might have some Jewish ancestry, character portray you, is pretty much damning him. You know, like, could he think of anything that would piss off Hitler more? Like, he even said that he didn't do any preparation for his role as Hitler because he was kind of like, you know, fuck that guy, which is fair enough, right? I don't know. On the other hand, right, this is the consensus we have. Jojo Rabbit's blend of irreverent humour and serious ideas definitely won't be to everyone's taste, but either way, this anti-hate satire is audacious to a fault. I say all that, I say someone makes exception. This won the highest award at Toronto. Won the People's Choice Award. And that's kind of, you know, that builds into what I'm saying of this being a more public film festival. It's just quite odd. Also a note is that the films that have won the People's Choice Award at Toronto, generally speaking, get at least nominated for Best Picture. Now, they have won it in the past. But I don't know, this is going to be very interesting to see what the public's reaction to this is. And we actually have a trailer to discuss about this in a minute. October 18th is when it's getting a general release. That's obviously, I don't know, sometimes that's the date you're given, sometimes that could be a week, give or take, a month, depending, in international markets. We have two more films I want to discuss. Uncut Gems. This comes from the Safdie brothers, who gave us the very, very good film Good Time 2 years ago with Robert Pattinson. Set in the Diamond District of New York City, Howard Ratner, a jewelry store owner and dealer to the rich and famous, must find a way to pay his debts when his merchandise is taken from one of his top sellers and girlfriend. Guess who plays Howard Ratner? Adam Sandler. That's right, Adam Sandler has decided to get serious again. And not only that, he's apparently very good. I've heard people actually saying that he could be an Oscar conversation, which, you know, they always kind of say that anytime they see a big film at a festival. Because it makes it sound like it's all a big important film. He could be an Oscar conversation. I don't know, but hey, that would be a turn up for the books, really. I don't think he's done a critically lauded role to that extent in a drama since Punch Drunk Love, maybe. Yeah, really, really positive reviews here. This was not its debut, but again, you get a much better idea at Toronto because it is such a more public one. It's releasing late December in America. Now, I believe I also heard internationally this is getting a Netflix release. So I don't know, maybe it mightn't be out at the end of this year. It could be out start of 2020 if it's going on Netflix, but I don't know. Yeah, I really liked Good Time. I think it's actually on Netflix. You should check that out if you can, because it's a very, very good film. But not to be forgotten is the last film we're going to talk about, and is definitely universally worldwide a Netflix film, The Laundromat. Okay, this is one we need to talk about. Plot synopsis. The film follows Ellen Martin, played by Meryl Streep, whose dream vacation takes a wrong turn and leads her down a rabbit hole of shady dealings that can all be traced to one Panama City law firm run by seductive partners Jurgen Mossack and Ramon Fonseca, played by Gary Oldman and Antonio Banderas, respectively. She soon learns that her minor predicament is only a drop in the bucket of millions of files linked to an offshore tax scheme to the world's richest and most powerful political leaders. Yeah, okay, so this is based on the Panama Papers from a couple of years back, and it's directed by Steven Soderbergh, the man who keeps constantly saying he's going to retire and then never does. This is not getting good reviews, to put it mildly. I mean, it's probably lucky the Goldfinch was as bad as it was, because otherwise this might be the flop of the festival. Yeah, but this sounds like another stinker from Netflix. At the moment, it's standing at 47% on Rotten Tomatoes. And the consensus says The Laundromat misuses its incredible cast by taking a disappointingly blunt and unfocused approach to dramatising the real-life events that inspired it. So that's, I think maybe Netflix just bought this, being like, it's Meryl Streep. She's getting an Oscar. But here's a sentence I thought I would never read. Meryl Streep apparently does blackface in the movie. Like, 2019, imagine that sentence. Meryl Streep does blackface. She has a scene where she has bronze skin, a false nose, and an exaggerated but not specific Latin accent. This is according to The Independent. And I verified this. I saw my buddy on Twitter, Ben from Filimbusters podcast, which you should check out as well. Confirming this. It's not going to age well, he said. This is wow, how tone deaf do you have to be to put that in a movie in this day and age? Like, and Meryl Streep, that was it a case where they're like, it's Meryl Streep, no one's going to care, it's Meryl Streep, she can get away with it. Oh, guess not. This is yeah, I don't think anyone's going to care about this film anyway, to be honest. It's getting dumped on Netflix. Doesn't sound like it's going to be a big factor, that it's definitely not as good as it could have been. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if something like that is edited out. You know, they've kind of been doing that lately with content. Anyway, that is those are probably the highlights of the Toronto International Film Festival. There's a few other films that we've talked about it in the past. Some that had debuted at Cannes previously. Films like The Lighthouse, which we'll talk about in a sec as well. But yeah, those are the ones I wanted to talk about. Probably most excited for Jojo Rabbit, maybe. Knives Out is a bit more of a crowd pleaser. I don't think that's going to necessarily get awards love. I'm very interested to see what Jojo Rabbit does as far as awards go and as far as how it goes with a general audience, whether it's accepted or rejected. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, probably a modest success. Could see it definitely getting a Best Actor now for Tom Hanks, probably. Uncut Gems, and this, I don't know much about this. I don't even know if I've seen a trailer for this yet. But going off the Safdie Brothers' last film, this might be too weird for the Oscars. I don't know. The Good Times is quite dark, but anyway, that leads us away from TIFF and back to Colorado for South Park, which got a 3-season renewal. So just to be clear, airing this month, season 23. South Park is getting another season 24, a season 25, a season 26. I have very mixed feelings about this. Okay, so Trey Parker and Matt Stone also said in the same interview that they're hoping to work on a movie, which is great. They haven't done a movie since Team America, I don't think, which is 15 years ago now. They've done some other projects, but that's been kind of it. And it's kind of odd. It feels to me like they have no real interest in the show anymore. That it's something of a sap on their work, on their talents. It's like they've been kind of jokingly, being like, cancel South Park the last few seasons. And I don't know, I think it kind of feels like they're not going to turn it down because it's too easy for them to do. Well, Comedy Central maybe don't want to cancel it because it still gets decent ratings, but it gets to a certain point. Like, South Park was the outsider for a long time. It was kind of the dark comedy with its finger to the world. And now it kind of feels like it's a bit more muted. Like, I'm not a fan of their new model, which is like their continuity. And it's like, it used to just be they had good ideas for episodes. Now it's just, what was in the papers this week? Okay, let's go. I'm not a fan of it. But again, this isn't like with something with The Simpsons. I'm like, oh, end it. With South Park, I'm okay with South Park being on TV because there is some stuff that is genuinely good in it. And I think it's good to have something that will, kind of not fight the power, because I think to a certain degree South Park has kind of become such a mainstream milestone of television that it kind of is on the inside at the moment. But I think it is good to have a discerning voice, and Trey and Matt have never been shy about voicing that, even if I feel like, it's definitely lost a bit of its edge. But hey, South Park is not going anywhere. 3 more years at least. Maybe I can get to season 30 and they'll end it, but I don't know. I think basically the statement from Comedy Central was like, we're great to have him, and Trey and Parker were like, we're here till you cancel us. So it sounds like it's just going to be there until Comedy Central and say, we're done. But regardless, it's there. Enjoy it if you want. I'll reserve judgment until the next season comes out, I suppose. But the last few seasons have been a bit rough. Speaking of a bit rough, Suicide Squad. Boy, is that last one rough. But this new one, The Suicide Squad, because that won't get confusing at all. I hate that titling trend where we put the word "the" in front of a movie and it's like, oh, it's a new movie, Fast and Furious, The Fast and Furious, fantastic. I mean, the title isn't the only thing that's been confusing with this movie. People have said it's a reboot. It's not a reboot, it's a sequel. It's a soft reboot, I guess. Which I guess this episode is also a soft reboot of my podcast. Ooh. Maybe not so different, you and I. Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad. Sorry, don't want to confuse people. Okay, James Gunn went to Twitter and unveiled the cast. Didn't say who they were playing, just the actors involved. We'd heard of some of these people in the film already. Some rumours that we'll get to in a minute. Okay. There is 24 names here. Some of these I'm going to butcher because I'll read through them very fast. Some of them I don't even recognise. David Dastalmachian, John Cena. That fulfills our wrestling quota for the episode. There you go. Welcome to the Phoenix Wrestling Network. Jai Courtney, Joaquin Cosio, Nathan Fillion, Joel Kinnaman, Mei Ling Ng, Flula Borg, Sean Gunn, Juan Diego Botto, Storm Reed, Pete Davidson, Taika Waititi, Alice Braga, Steve Agee, Tanashi Kajisi, Daniela Melchior, Peter Capaldi, Julio Ruiz, Jennifer Holland, Viola Davis, Idris Elba, Margot Robbie, and Michael Rooker. Hey, I didn't screw up the pronunciation that bad, or else I just didn't stop or dwell on it. Hey, I'm getting better at this. Finally, it only took like 24 episodes. That's our cast. We don't know who they're playing. Let's go through a few people that we heard rumoured already. Of course, there are 3 people that are returning here. Jai Courtney is back as Captain Boomerang or whatever. Who else do we have returning? Viola Davis, presumably Amanda Waller. Well, she is Amanda Waller, what am I saying? Margot Robbie is Harley Quinn. Well, how big a role she'd have, probably debatable. She mightn't be in it that much. And I think I saw one other person returning, Joel Kinnaman as Rick Flag. So that means there's 20 new names there. Now, James Gunn put the tweet out saying, don't get too attached. Not surprising. A lot of these people have to die. There's some very small name actors there in some capacities. I don't necessarily think that's an indication, but I do think you might get a few, when you get stunt casting and they just kill them off very quickly. We could get some of that. The people that were rumoured for this before, Idris Elba was rumoured. Well, Idris Elba's had a weird one because originally we had heard he was going to play Deadshot because Will Smith wasn't available. And then they kind of wheeled that in and were like, no, he's not Deadshot anymore. Will Smith come back at some point, please. We don't know who he's playing. He was rumoured to be playing Bronze Tiger, I heard, at one stage. David Destalmachin is apparently Polka Dot Man. Daniela Melchior is Ratcatcher, we had heard. And again, we don't know how long these people are going to last. They'll get killed off pretty quickly. John Cena was apparently in talks with the role of Peacemaker. Storm Reed, who we've seen in A Wrinkle in Time. I say we've seen as if anyone saw that movie. Is going to play Idris Elba's daughter, apparently. Any other people? Steve Agee at one stage was rumoured to voice King Shark, but so was Michael Rooker at one point. I think that's all the people we heard rumoured to be involved. So a lot of these people, I'm going to guess, are going to be killed off pretty quickly. Now, not a surprise. And those key people there to DC Universe that won't be. But I don't think it's going to be as simple as, that actor's a well-known actor. We're going to keep him. I think there might be a few messing around things there where you might have a bigger name actor who gets killed off pretty quickly. But hey, pretty interesting nonetheless. James Gunn has always been very good at taking kind of nonsensy characters and making them kind of interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of them there that might get killed off pretty quickly. The other thing that's interesting, I haven't seen a lot of people say this, the Suicide Squad logo is down the bottom that we got to look at, and it's very reminiscent of the Ostrander Suicide Squad run. I think that's his name, which we had heard as a rumor of before, but that's kind of the renowned run for Suicide Squad, so maybe that could hint that that's what he's adapting, I don't know. But anyway, speaking of another logo down the bottom is Warner Brothers, and we got another Warner Brothers film announced this week, and oh god, we need to talk about this one. Funko Pops, you might know them. They're those things with big heads and beady eyes, not a baby, like the collectibles things you have in your shelves. There's Funko Pops for everything. Movies, TV shows, video games, everything. They're making a movie of them. Yeah, I'm just going to let that sink in for a sec. This is the statement put out by Warner Animation Group, and then we will dig into this then. We're thrilled for this opportunity and are committed to make an amazing Funko movie that stands on its own merit. This isn't about selling toys or building a brand. Ha! The team at Warner Animation Group have a unique vision of what the first film should be, and we are extremely excited to take this journey alongside them. The first film. Yeah, we're getting more than one apparently. Right. Here's what's weird. We need to learn a few lessons from toy movies, and we also need to learn the difference between toys and collectibles. That sounds very nerdy. It's not an action figure, it's a collectible. Okay. If anyone would have learned this lesson, I thought it would have been Warner Brothers. They, of course, gave us the Lego movie. And this is one thing I hate with the Lego movie. The Lego movie is pretty good. In fact, the Lego Batman movie and even the Lego movie Part 2 are pretty good. I didn't see whatever the other one, Ninjago or whatever it was. I didn't see that. No one did. Those are pretty good. And the problem with it is that now that they're good, anytime one of these weird toy movies get announced, people are like, oh, well, what about the Lego movie? You know, maybe it could be good. I don't know. But, a couple things. Not even the Lego movie sequels, not even the Lego movies that followed, managed to reach the heights of the Lego movie. I'm talking not necessarily critically, although, yeah, probably critically as well. Commercially, they didn't manage it. Look at the other toy movies that have come out before this and after this. I mean, this year alone we had Ugly Dolls and we had Playmobil, both of which have flopped majorly. Now, I think they were maybe both released by the same studio, and yeah, they're not as recognizable as Funko's, but still. The other thing is that with those toys, with those brands, people have a certain connection to the brand. Generally kids. Because they're making kids' movies. The Funko Pops movie, I don't think Funkos are really aimed at kids. They're aimed at an older demographic that wants something collectible. It's not really, like, Funkos aren't a good toy. you know? So you're aiming at an older demographic, and presumably this is going to be a kids' movie. And if this is a kids' movie, are you alienating the people who buy Funkos? Or are they just hoping that this is like name brand and it's an animated kids' movie? Just take your kid to it and kill some time. I don't know. Maybe it'll be okay. The other problem is, of course, licensing. With a toy like Playmobil or Lego, they have a brand. People know what it is. People have an identity. You know, they identify with Lego. They identify with Playmobil. There are characters that aren't necessarily licensed. Funko Pops are only licensed merchandise. So this will live and die on what characters they choose to put in the film. The fact it's being made by Warner Brothers means that they'd probably pull mostly from their own library. And that I think that was an issue to a certain degree in certainly the second Lego movie. It felt like they were only pulling characters from stuff they own. Now, I will say as well, this was rumoured before that they were making this movie. Back in January, Daniel RPK, Daniel Richtman on Twitter, had a scoop about this, and he said these were the characters confirmed for the Funko movie. Darth Vader, Deadpool, Hellboy, Harley Quinn, Wonder Woman, Care Bears, My Little Pony. Which isn't a bad list. I don't know how reliable it is. Of course, there's different contract negotiations you're going to have to use there. I don't know what the licensing rights is. I don't know if Funko license it, are they allowed to use their own version of that character for media? I would imagine not. I don't know. It's an odd situation. I don't think it's a good idea. Eat my words in 2 or 3 years when this comes out and it's a massive success, but I just find it very odd. Anyway, moving on to probably the most depressing news. As if I haven't been down on most of the news today. This is a bit of a downer episode. Sorry about that. If this is your first episode, I'm normally a slightly more chipper. Sometimes there's normally at least some news I'm positive about, but it's hard to be positive about the streaming wars that they've begun, because the reality of it is very quickly setting in. We got news from a lot of streaming services this week. I'm going to start with the big one that broke just as I was about to record. Is that NBC Universal have talked about their streaming service, which is now officially called Peacock. Awful name. Way to go, NBC. Obviously, the NBC logo is a peacock, so that's why their logo is that. But Peacock is not a great name for a streaming service. Come on, if we're honest. And yeah, guess what? They're capitalizing on your nostalgia, that's for sure. Because we've already got. I can't even say capitalizing on nostalgia because one of them is not even that old. There's talk of a few reboots. First of all, it's going to launch in April 2020. I didn't see a price listed yet, but it's a bit early. Yeah, what they're talking about as far as original series is a Battlestar Galactica reboot headed by Sam Esmail, who did Mr. Robot. Battlestar Galactica only ended like a decade ago. But okay, I guess most of these plays are going for a big budget sci-fi series that might draw people in. It seems very odd to bring back Battlestar Galactica so quickly, but regardless, and that's an important thing to point out. This is NBC. It's not just NBC. This is going to be Universal streaming service. NBC Universal. That's the corporate entity. So we have a Disney streaming service. This is the Universal streaming service. We're going to have a Warner Bros. Streaming service. The other major studios. I mean, Fox are gone now. I guess Fox's will be Hulu because it's under the Disney umbrella. I don't think Sony have one, but anyway. The Saved by the Bell is also getting rebooted, which is crazy. I can't say I have any, people love Saved by the Bell. I don't have any affection or really memory of it, to be honest. They've confirmed the cast is mostly back, Elizabeth Berkley and Mario Lopez. I don't know what that's going to be. Are they going to be teaching the school? Is it going to be like, we need to go back to night school? Is it going to be Community? I don't know. Very odd. Punky Brewster is getting rebooted. We talked about this briefly before I took the piss out of it. Soleil, Jesus, this is the most pretentious name ever. I think this person was in Sabrina. Soleil Moon Frye. That's like what? Sun Moon Frye? Okay. A grown up version of her character. Fine. New series. There's another new series here. Parks and Rec creator and The Good Place creator Mike Shore is working on a series called Rutherford Falls starring Ed Helms. I would say this as well. This isn't mentioned in the press release I'm looking at here, but there's a stream. I believe it's coming to the streaming service. Tina Fey is working on a show. I think with Robert Carlyle, who she did 30 Rock and what was that other one she did? Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. They're working on a series with Ted Danson, where I think he's the mayor of LA. And rumor came out, or recently, I think it was confirmed more or less, that was originally going to be a spin off of 30 Rock with Alec Baldwin, which would have been really good because he's great as Jack Lemmon, but that's not to be. It is what it is. The new season of AP Boyo, as we said, that got cancelled and then got brought to the streaming service for season 3. A second Psych spin off movie. I'm not a fan of Psych, but people love it. We have a new drama series called Dr. Death, based on the podcast of the same name, starring Jamie Dornan, Alec Baldwin, and Christian Slater. And then we have the massive list of content that they have in their back catalogue. I think this stuff is all available at launch. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. So we have 30 Rock, Bates Motel, Battlestar Galactica, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Cheers, Chrisley Knows Best, Covert Affairs, Downton Abbey, Everybody Loves Raymond, Frasier, Friday Night Lights, House, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, King of Queens, Married with Children, Monk, Parenthood, Psych, Royal Pains, Saturday Night Live, Superstore, The Real Housewives, Top Chef, Will and Grace, and maybe the two biggest ones they have now, The Office, Parks and Recreation. Okay, let's break down that list a little bit. Some of these, I don't know if they're going to be exclusive. There was some question about whether they'd still be exclusive because at least a few of them are on Netflix. In America, a few of them are on Amazon and Hulu as well, apparently. I didn't know that shows could be on so many networks, but apparently they are. Parks and Rec is one I'm talking about there. 30 Rock is a good one to have. Big catalogue there. Same with Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Cheers and Frasier, having them in the same place is fantastic. Same with Everybody Loves Raymond, another really long-running show. There's some surprising ones there. I'm surprised Downton Abbey is there. They have a few things there for reality people, obviously Keeping Up with the Kardashians, The Real Housewives. You know, like this is a good list. As far as the big sitcoms, probably in the last 20 years, most of the ones are there, to be honest. It's quite a good list. And The Office is the one you can kind of build your brand around. That is like as far as the two big, well, three. Well, we'll get to the third one in a minute. But the two big ones in this day and age for streaming services are The Office and Friends. And they have The Office. That is something you can build a streaming service off. Which is crazy. It's just one show. But anyway, Saturday Night Live is an interesting one as well. I think that'll be very helpful if they have like full seasons and that kind of thing. But we will see. As far as movies, because it can't just be TVs, obviously, it's NBC Universal. At launch, they're going to have Bridesmaids, Knocked Up, Meet the Parents, Meet the Fockers, American Pie, A Beautiful Mind, Back to the Future, Brokeback Mountain, Casino, Dallas Buyers Club, Do the Right Thing, Erin Brockovich, E.T., Field of Dreams, Jaws, Mamma Mia, Shrek, The Breakfast Club, The Bourne franchise, The Despicable Me franchise, Fast and Furious franchise. Right. That's not a bad list to start with. Some pretty good movies there. And obviously they're going to add more because as licensing deals expire. The most notable one I can think of that's not there is probably the Jurassic World and Jurassic Park movies. But aside from that, you know, they're going to have all their animated stuff presumably. At least. All the Illumination animation stuff. Not a bad list though. They haven't announced a price. I think that'll depend. But yeah, God, we're really getting to the point where it's bursting with all these TV streaming services. Something's got to give. It's just going to go back to the way it was, where you just buy a package with a few of them. The Apple TV Plus streaming service from Apple also got its price announced, which is $499 a month. I think it's its cheapest streaming service available, which is insane. I can't say I have much love for the Apple TV network from what I've seen. They did release a trailer for C with Jason Momoa. I haven't watched it. Although he did put out a really weird statement where he was like, "This is the best character I've ever played." To which I'm sure Warner Brothers were like, "What the hell, Aquaman? What are you doing?" Like, odd. They also put out that morning. It's called The Morning Show with Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston and Steve Carell. And I have to admit, like the rumors going around about Apple was that it was going to be really kind of sanitized TV shows. That looked kind of interesting. It was basically looked like what's that guy Matt Lauer in America. Like there was some sexual scandal or whatever. I think there was kind of implications that might have been made up in the show. What I did find weird was that I think like the general idea is that Jennifer Aniston is being kicked off the show and they're replacing her with the newer model, which is Reese Witherspoon. And I'm like, is that really much of a newer model? There's not that much of a difference age-wise between them, is there? But anyway, it looked more interesting than I thought, but I don't think I'll ever watch it, to be honest. I don't know. I think you can also get like a free year if you buy an Apple product or something weird like that, but it's more available than you would think. They're putting a lot of money into it as well, but I can't say it's one for me. But what is very interesting with that price is apparently, at least in American pricing, you can get Apple TV Plus and Disney Plus for less money than Netflix. So that's it's going to be very interesting to see if any of these can take on Netflix. Content-wise, certainly, they beat Netflix, I think, in a lot of regards. But pricing-wise, and whether people will just go with what's known, could hurt them. I don't know. Speaking of Disney Plus, it actually had a soft launch in the Netherlands for free. So enjoy that, Netherlands. Not much you can say here as far as what's there. A few surprises is some of the animated catalogue. They have Gargoyles, and they have X-Men, the animated series, and some of Spider-Man. So, yeah, people were kind of surprised with this. But the big things that people wanted to talk about were Star Wars Rebels and Simpsons. I think those were the ones that piqued viewers' interest. And I don't think either of them are there at launch as far as Netherlands, but very interesting all the same. See how it does. They also really annoyed me, actually. They annoyed me, and it was worse because I didn't know it was the thing. I knew that we were getting a Muppets kind of short form interview series, but I didn't know or had forgotten that they were making a Muppets TV series that got cancelled already. Which means that we're just left with a kind of short interview series of the Muppets. I'm going to say something that I think is starting to appear true and has been true for a while, and that's that Disney doesn't know or doesn't care about the Muppets. And it's, look, Muppets, some people love it, some people hate them. I love the Muppets personally. I think it's so sad that you have a show that has such a legacy, and it works. It works in the modern day. You can do something with that. Do you know what you do? Give the Muppets a late night talk show. Do that. Make it like the Muppet Show. Get a guest every night. Maybe even make it a weekly thing. Don't have to make it every night like other talk shows. There you go. There's a free idea. Do that. It'd be a really easy thing to do. It's kind of a shame. I just don't think Disney have ever known what to do with the Muppets. I think they just hold on to it for legacy. And apparently the Muppet Show actually isn't on the streaming service either. I think the more recent one is, which I never actually finished, the one there was kind of weird. That was like The Office with Muppets. And the Muppets had sex lives, and I was like, ugh. Anyway, fun fact, the second ever Muppets pilot to be filmed before the Muppet Show was called The Muppets Sex and Violence. Because Jim Henson wanted something that could be a bit more adult oriented. So hey, didn't stray away that far from the Muppets formula. And last bit of streaming news, because God, I'm so sick of talking about streaming services now, is that Netflix are getting Seinfeld. Can't wait for people to be like, oh, this is, how dare they? Oh, like they did with Friends, which is really weird. Yeah, this isn't too surprising. I think it's 2022 it's getting it though, which is like, they obviously announced this because all the headlines, of course, said Netflix are losing The Office and Friends, but they're getting Seinfeld, which is basically, they knew if they put it out, that's what was going to be the headline. Which is basically like, you thought we were losing, but we're not. We're getting Seinfeld. I'd love to know how much it cost them to. That must have cost them a shitload of money, man. But regardless, it's weird because Seinfeld, I feel like, is a show that has been hurt by its placement on certain streaming services. I know it is available on streaming. It was on Crackle at one point. It's on Hulu in America now. I think it's on Amazon Prime in Europe. But it feels like a show that, like, its legacy has somewhat been hurt in recent times by not being available. But who knows? I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see what people's take on it is. But yeah, it's odd because that they're shouting with this 3 years down, but that's obviously why. Maybe they knew that Netflix or that NBC were going to say, we have The Office and Parks and Rec, and they're like, we have Seinfeld, and they put it out early. I don't know. Anyway, that is our news this week. A lot of news, a lot of frustrating news, a lot of uninteresting news. And hey, that's how it goes. But before we exit our news, I'm going to start a new feature called the Minute Long Meltdown, where I just rant about a topic for a minute. So here we go.
The Minute Long Meltdown is presented by Chernobyl. Not the disaster.
Not the disaster. Just to be clear, we're not mocking the disaster. Okay? We're just sponsored by Chernobyl. That's all. Don't think about it. Alright, this is a feature I wanted to do because sometimes things don't fit into the news and I just need to purge myself of the anger. And, not anger, but sometimes I just don't get it or understand, and I need to talk about it. And what I want to talk about this week is the music video we got for Charlie's Angels. Now, I'm not going to start the timer yet. It will be a minute long when I get there. But I just, in case you haven't, because this could be people's first episodes, I know. The Charlie's Angels reboot is one I don't get. I don't get people's interest in it. In fact, people don't seem that interested in it in general, to be honest. Some people are holding up like, how dare they, when this movie was a classic, when they made it like a year ago, or a decade ago, sorry, with Drew Barrymore and Cameron Diaz, which was, those were schlocky, stupid movies as well. But I don't get it. I thought the trailer was odd in that it was like, we're independent, we're not women, we're strong. And then it had moments in the trailer where it felt like they were like, going mad about all the fashion. And you're like, it's kind of a mixed message. So yeah, let's talk about this. They have a music video called Don't Call Me Angel. I'm going to start the timer and just rant and see what comes out. So here we go, the minute-long meltdown. Charlie's Angels music video. Okay, so this is a music video with Lana Del Rey, Miley Cyrus, and Ariana Grande. Okay, Don't Call Me Angel is what it's called. First of all, this is obviously not geared towards me. I don't like this song. That's fine. Miley Cyrus, Ariana Grande, makes sense. Lana Del Rey does not belong in there at all. She's like has this really awkward croning voice that doesn't suit this song at all. They just threw her in there. Then we have some of the lyrics. Don't call me angel. Right. You work for a spy agency. Call Charlie's Angels. If you were... And then... Oh, wait, sorry, there's another line. You can't pay my price. Presumably this is a detective agency or a spy agency that you hire. So you can't pay her price. I'm guessing it's a line about prostitution, which is really weird to put in this. I don't know. Presumably you can call them angels if you hire them for a job, because that's what they're called. Unless they give you your real name, in which case they're not fucking good spies, are they? And then we have the awkward music video, which I swear to God, half this music video is Ariana Grande just looking over her shoulder seductively, and that's what we get. Awful music video. Never going to top Destiny's Child one. There's our timer. Ugh, right. I feel like I got something out of me there. It's cheaper than therapy, folks. Shout at your computer and a microphone for a minute. I don't know, it's just really baffling. I don't get this movie. I find it very odd that they're making Charlie's Angels. As I documented on the show before, they rebooted the show and no one would watch it on television a couple of years ago. Most people don't even know that. I don't know. It doesn't look great. Music video is stupid. Song isn't great. But then again, hey, I'm clearly not demographic for Charlie's Angels or for an Ariana Grande Miley Cyrus song. So that was our minute-long meltdown. I'm sure people are going to disagree about that one. I'm also sure I probably misunderstood Charlie's Angels. If there's any die-hard Charlie's Angel fans out there, you can at me. I don't know. I don't think they still exist, but I'm sure someone's going to be like, they're not called Charlie's Angels. Only Charlie can call them angels. Oh well. That's my thought on it. What the hell? You look just like me. Oh my god, are you a time traveler? Yes, I come from a timeline where Marion Armstrong yelled at you for forgetting to promote the Phoenix Wrestling Network. Seems like a very minor reason to time travel, but I guess I'll just promote the network and make it easy. You're listening to the Pop Cult Pod on the Phoenix Wrestling Network, but it's one of many great podcasts you can get right now. When this is done, why don't you check out Not a Bother Pod with Marion Armstrong, Billy Bedlam and Matt Schuyler. Each episode the guys tackle a topic. They've done ghosts, cults, conspiracies, and it's always a great time. So whether they're picking fights with Scientologists or picking up on the pronunciation of Billy Bedlam, you're bound to have a good time with the lads. But hey, this is a wrestling network. Where's the wrestling? Why don't you go to hell with Raven Creed? Going to Hell with Raven Creed features her and her guests talking wrestling. 4 things they'd like to send to hell and 1 thing they'd like to bring back. Raven is a very charismatic host. She just had Justy on. Justy is always great on podcasts. You should absolutely check that one out. Want more wrestling? Check out Support Irish Wrestling coming very soon from the baby effing phase Marion Armstrong, where he looks at Irish wrestling and a behind the scenes look at Phoenix Wrestling on show day. Wait, does this mean I'm going to discover time travel tomorrow? No, you only discover that in a world you get yelled at. Also, I don't know how to go back in time, just forward. Oh, that's kind of disappointing. Wait, if there's 2 of us, doesn't that mean there's a paradox and one of us has to... Oh. Checking out the Phoenix Wrestling Network is literally a matter of life and death. Well, that was really weird. Also, the guy got it wrong. If he can't go back in time... I think I might have needlessly killed the man. Well, that doesn't matter. Anyway, moving on. Let's talk trailer trash, because there's 2 or 3 trailers I want to talk about here today. Nothing that great came out. It wasn't really a big time for trailers, but there's a few that we should discuss anyway. So here we go, our trailer trash. And I just remembered our new trailer trash theme. It's glorious. Listen.
This is the theme for trailer.
This is the theme for trailer. This is the theme for trailer trash. Get in the bin.
Get in the bin.
Okay, so first trailer I want to talk about is for Dr. Sleep. This is the sequel to The Shining, I guess. Based, of course, on the book by Stephen King that follows Danny Torrance years after he's left the Overlook Hotel. This is a really good trailer. But here are my concerns. Okay, Dr. Sleep, the book, actually had some pretty decent reviews overall. The problem I have with it is that the trailer is based entirely on, well, not entirely, but a lot of it's on, like, remember this from The Shining? Do you remember this? This is the scene. Here he is going down on the tricycle. Apparently that's only the last part of the movie. So it kind of feels like you're being sold a lie a little bit here. It does look really supernatural, kind of not superhero-y, but you know, that kind of way, where it's like, oh, good fighting evil, and they've got powers, but we've got our powers too, which kind of dampens it a little bit for me. But it does look very good. I don't know, is it going to be very scary? Certainly. It definitely seems to lack the subtlety of the original as well. But I guess that just speaks to modern horror films overall. This is directed by Mike Flanagan. I think he was involved in The Haunting of Hill House, which I haven't seen, but I understood was a bit more subtle. So maybe there's still hope for it. But there is a lot of... I actually saw this in cinemas when it came out, and the person behind me said, "Oh, is that Jack Nicholson?" Which left me confused. I assume is he meant to be Jack Nicholson's character as opposed to confusing Ewan McGregor with Jack Nicholson? I assume. But yeah, I'm doing this about a week and a half late, but no, it was not Jack Nicholson. Actually, the person behind me in the cinema wouldn't shut up about how great Stephen King was. And didn't even know Dr. Sleep. Well, alright. I'm just being passive aggressive. Yeah, this looks pretty good. It's coming out in November. I like Ewan McGregor's a great actor. A lot of great images in this, but most of it is relying on The Shining, which I don't love as much as everyone else does. It is a very good movie. It's just, people are like, it's the greatest film, and what did he mean when he put this in? No director would be that good. It's like, okay, maybe you're just reading too much and something's not there. But hey, excited for it nonetheless. I'd like a good, more suspenseful horror film, and this could be it. But hey, if you don't like subtlety, if you like subtlety, like you like a hammer to the head, there is Bad Boys for Life. They're back. It's for life this time. The Bad Boys for Life, which disappointingly doesn't go with the move of having a number 3 as the E in life. I'm very disappointed by. It really should have left Bad Boys for Life for the next movie, shouldn't it? For the 4th one. But anyway, they're back. The Bad Boys. I don't remember their names, so I'm just going to keep calling them the Bad Boys. Martin Lawrence, Will Smith, and in case you forgot what the what the relationship was between them, guess who gets out of the car all suave? Will Smith, boy, like he hasn't made a movie in 20 years, and you know, Will Smith's still acting like he's really, really cool, and in his 20s, getting out of the Ferrari or whatever it is, no problem, sun flare everywhere, and the camera's all low because he looks so tall that way, suit in the breeze and the sunglasses on, and then Martin Lawrence, oh, he hit the door off a fire hydrant. Oh, that doofy klutz. He can't be a great cop, could he? I mean, a great cop wouldn't have parked in front of the fire hydrant anyway, because that's illegal. But I guess they're bad boys. They're just that bad, those boys. Alright, this is the first Bad Boys movie not directed by Michael Bay. I know that, but I could have easily forgotten that watching this trailer. I guess they just hired 2 directors called something. Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah to direct this one, and they just said, hey, will we just do what Michael Bay did? And they said, yep, because it looks like a Michael Bay movie. I don't have any love or affection for Bad Boys movies. Some people like Bad Boys 2, ironically. I don't either. I barely remember the first Bad Boys. The second one, I was like, this is kind of stupid. I don't know. The only thing that gave me any bit of interest in this is that it's written by Joe Carnahan, who has made some good movies. He was going to direct it at one point. But yeah, it's nothing great, is it? Joey Pants is in it, Joe Pantoliano, whose autobiography I have in my room here somewhere, which is interesting. He looks like he's going a bit mad. He's shouting and cursing, and oh boy, he's had enough of them bad boys. I mean, I'm spinning my wheels here. There's nothing in this trailer. It's stupid. It's action. It's the same relationship it's always been. Will Smith's cool. Martin Lawrence is the dopey, like, schlub. Like, how do we get paired together? It's stupid. And the biggest warning sign about this being any bit good or bad is that it's being released in January, the dumping ground of Hollywood. So it's probably not going to be very good. And looking at the trailer, that's not that surprising. Moving on. Last trailer I want to talk about. There was other trailers that came out, but there just wasn't much in them. The Lighthouse trailer looks great. The movie looks great, but there's not much I want to dissect there. There's some movies at this point where I'm just like, I want to see this movie. I don't want to talk about the trailer that much. I don't want to dissect it too much. Between Two Ferns is one that I could have done without seeing the trailer, but it doesn't really matter. Obviously, this is based on the Funny or Die series with Zach Galifianakis where he interviews it. It's getting a movie, Between Two Ferns, the movie, and it's coming to Netflix on Friday, I think. So it really it's barely worth even talking about this, because if you're listening to this as it comes out, it's probably coming out to the day after this comes out, or maybe 2 days. It's coming out on Friday. And if you're listening to this after, it's probably already out. Between Two Ferns is obviously interviews with celebrities. Between Two Ferns. This is taking a really strange approach where he kills Matthew McConaughey, I think it is. And then he has to go and do a TV series of 10 episodes around the country. And look, the interviews are going to be great. They always are. But the question is in between stuff going to be great? And it's, of course, involves Scott Aukerman, who did some great comedy stuff with Comedy Bang Bang, among other stuff. And I hope it's really good. The trailer, though, it doesn't really sell me. And I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to think about this or look at this trailer much more, because it feels like it would just spoil the movie knowing all the celebrity cameos in it. So, yeah, pretty funny. Interested to see where it goes. But not entirely sold on the whole premise, but we won't have long to wait, I guess. Friday. So there we have it. All right, that is our trailer trash.
The Pop Cult Pod with Tompott on the Phoenix Wrestling Network.
You're listening to the Pop Cult Pod, and this is a transition.
Well, just like it said in the tin, as I said, it's a transition, and that means that we're on to our topic. So if you've never heard the podcast before, generally we do our movie news, our trailers, maybe a few other bits and pieces, and then we do a topic if we have the time. And this week, of course, we are now on the Phoenix Wrestling Network. Our topic is going to be wrestling movies. Who should have a wrestling movie? And maybe a little bit, a few recommendations. Maybe people who have had wrestling movies and that kind of thing. Right, first of all, let's talk about some of the wrestling movies there have been. There hasn't really been that many, to be honest with you. Overall, it's been a pretty it's been an undeveloped medium as far as wrestling movies go. I think people favour a documentary more, and we might get into why I think that is in a sec. But as far as wrestlers that have had biopics, we have Gorgeous George sort of had one a long time ago called The One and Only, which had Henry Winkler in the role. But it was kind of loosely based on him. Of course, Fighting With My Family came out last year. Or it was this year. Oh God, this year's been long. Yeah, it was this year. About Paige. It was, of course, featured The Rock. It was produced by The Rock. The Wrestler. This is obviously not based on a real wrestler, but apparently it's heavily inspired by Jake the Snake. But, that's kind of hearsay. I don't think it's fully accurate. That's kind of been it as far as big adaptations of wrestlers. I think what it comes down to, and it is when you look at those movies, it kind of makes sense, is that wrestling movies are hard to get right, because to a mainstream audience, to an audience maybe that's not as wise to wrestling as presumably the people listening to this are, what is interesting is where that line blurs. Like to the regular person, they say, "Oh, wrestling is fake," that kind of thing. And because of that, the achievements in the wrestling ring really aren't that interesting. And you need to take a step back and look at the personality of the person, their personal life, etc. And sometimes, in some cases, what makes a good story in wrestling isn't that interesting when transferred to film. Like, if done right, let's say an amazing wrestling story, okay, takes place over the course of weeks, months, built up to an eventual match that is blown off. There's an art to telling that story, and when you're invested in a story, it's amazing. But how can you really translate weeks and months of build-up into a moment in film where it'll be entirely satisfying, especially when you're more likely to face non-wrestling fans when you make a movie who are just going to say, oh, well, it's fake, and then they not understand the stakes or the investment in it. That's kind of the problem you face. So when you're trying to make a good wrestling movie, you kind of have to have a lot of the backstage stuff and their lives outside of it. Like the wrestler explored, really the wrestling was so much in the background. It was about a wrestler. It was about a broken man trying to come to terms with, you know, the end of his career and trying to realise the mistakes he'd made, that kind of thing. And the things he maybe gave up to be a wrestler. Fighting with My Family had parts about wrestling, obviously, but it was mostly about how we got this talent from a small town of England that came onto such a big, massive global stage and the trials and tribulations he faced to get there. And I think that's sort of the problem on why things are different. I think I made a list here, maybe my roughly five films or wrestlers I want to see have movies made of their lives. I think it is more interesting when you're making a movie about looking at where the line blurs, where reality meets the fictional or the predetermined. That's what makes a good movie about wrestling, in my opinion. And you know, this isn't a dictatorship. You let me know if you feel differently online. I want to rule out a few people first, right off the bat, as far as when I came to my pick about wrestling biopics or wrestlers who should have biopics. I ruled out 3 right off the bat. These are movies that are apparently in the works, have been for a while in some cases. Vince McMahon would be a very good movie to make about Vince McMahon, because he really kind of had a stranglehold, and probably still does to a certain degree, on the industry in coming to power. There's of course been a lot of shares of controversies, and that's again something that makes for a good story. It can't just be all up, it has to be up and down. The thing I've heard is that this is being made now. It's unfortunately being made with, you know, the cooperation or assistance of WWE, so it's probably not going to be the warts and all portrayal that we get. It's probably going to be this strong businessman and all that kind of stuff. But isn't that interesting? Vince McMahon is an interesting figure for a lot of reasons. A lot of good reasons, a lot of bad reasons, a lot of, oh, this man is a psychopath detached from reality reasons. But we're not entirely going to get that if they, you know, have involvement with the movie themselves, probably. Which is kind of... Hulk Hogan is getting a biopic about his life, directed, I think, by Todd Phillips, coming to Netflix. Chris Hemsworth is Hulk Hogan, which is amazing. Let me tell you something, brother. Yeah, this is a weird one. I don't believe WWE are involved in this one. I'm assuming they're going to have some involvement. I know Hulk Hogan is on as a producer, and Eric Bischoff is involved as a producer. But the question is whether it's going to be, you know, a glamorized portrayal. Because, of course, Hulk Hogan is a very divisive figure. Not just for his recent controversies, but because he used a lot of his influence backstage, apparently, to ruin careers, to make himself out to be the top dog constantly. Whether or not that will be explored, who knows? It could be a very one-sided thing again. And, you know, like I said, just because someone was a big name in the wrestling industry and was very successful in the ring, I don't think that necessarily makes a good story. But, you know, anyway, we will see, because of course he's probably one of the bigger names, so that's what you obviously go for. The last one is one I've heard has been in the works for a long time. Never heard it get any real traction, to be honest, and that is one on Chris Benoit. Look, I don't know how you make that movie. It feels like people only want to make that movie for the Grizzly factor, and then if you're doing it for that reason, that's just really kind of disgusting, to be honest. But I don't know why you make that movie in general. What's the point? Like, you know, he was a great wrestler, but I don't expect the movie to touch on that. I don't know. I've heard, you know, you hear rumors constantly. I think one name I heard attached was God, what's that guy's name? He played Sabretooth. I can't remember his name. Liev Schreiber. There we go. And Lexi Alexander, I think, was directing it. But the title you always hear is like Crossface, I think it's called. And, you know, I don't know why you would make that movie unless you were just doing an exploitative movie. And that sounds like what it would be, which is kind of disgusting, quite frankly. So I don't want to see a Chris Benoit movie. I'm sure there are people out there that do want to, but I don't think it's fair, to be honest. I don't think it is right to make a movie about him. But, you know, it's not my say, and I don't think we'll ever see it, because especially with something like that, you probably need some cooperation, at least from the WWE, and I don't think they will ever have any involvement in that, and understandably so. But anyway, those are movies I know that are in the works. So far we've touched on movies that exist, movies that are in the works. These are people I often see mentioned for, you know, this person should get a movie. And I'm not saying these people aren't deserving of a movie. I'm just saying I had choices I preferred, or a movie couldn't necessarily do their story justice, or maybe even that their story is quite linear. You know, a good story has ups and downs. As we'll get to in a minute, we talk about a bit about story structure. So the honourable mentions, I hear this one a lot. I think this is just modern fans. To be honest, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea for me. I just don't think it's necessary. CM Punk. To be honest, like I like CM Punk. CM Punk's story about wrestling, obviously, if again, I have to remember there are people who have no familiarity with wrestling who might just be coming into this now that we've joined the network, and have never heard of wrestling or know nothing about wrestling, but they're just listening to this podcast. CM Punk was one of the first big independent wrestlers to come to WWE. He kind of, according to a lot of people, laid the groundwork for that. And he probably is most noteworthy for basically walking out on the company under certain circumstances. And, you know, there's been podcasts and all sorts of things, and people still chant his name, where he's kind of come out against the company very angrily, and it seems the company kind of went after him a little bit as well. Look, I don't know if there is a basis for a good movie, and there are certainly interesting aspects to his career, but whether or not it's a good movie, I don't know. Certainly don't know what the ending is, because, you know, it's too recent, really. And I think people only want it because it's one of the big controversies of recent memory as far as wrestling fans go, and wrestling fans are nothing if not having a goldfish memory in terms of things that happen in WWE at times, and they definitely exploit that as well. Haku, one of the most badass people in wrestling, but again, there's only so many times you can do the story of, oh, he's a badass. That's not that interesting. Haku's considered one of the toughest men in wrestling ever, but it doesn't necessarily make things interesting. It doesn't necessarily make for a good movie. And like every wrestling movie, and again, this is giving up to the Phoenix guys, wrestling training is not easy, folks. It is difficult as fuck, and every movie is going to have that part, so you need something that's going to stand out from that. So wrestling, you know, just constantly being like, oh, wrestling's tough and I made it, that's not that interesting. You know, you need something a bit more to it. Antonio Inoki, this is an interesting one. This is one I could almost have included, but I decided not to, as for reasons you'll see in a minute. Inoki is a Japanese wrestler. He's probably, I think, one of the main reasons you would consider him for a movie. First of all, he founded New Japan Pro Wrestling, which still goes to this day and is very successful. Probably the biggest wrestling, actually is the biggest wrestling promotion in Japan. He very famously fought Muhammad Ali in a fight, and seemingly did enough damage that actually Ali had injuries in his later life due to it. But yeah, and the guy also went into politics. I think he was a councillor and he helped free Japanese hostages. So a lot of good stories in there. Whether or not it's kind of where it's going to be very entertaining is another question. El Santo, Inoki is a kind of hero of Japanese. I think El Santo is, I know it's kind of strange from a Western perspective, but El Santo is probably the biggest wrestler ever. Maybe followed by another person on this list who we'll get to. He's a Mexican wrestler that had a crazy long career, over 5 decades, I believe. Like, he was never seen without his mask until very near his death, when he took it off in a TV interview. And he's this cultural icon that really is tied to Mexico. He even has a cameo in the movie Coco, which is obviously about Mexican culture that Pixar made. That tells you how much of a tie-in he is to Mexican culture. He starred in movies that he starred in like 50 movies, even though the guy apparently isn't a great actor. The movies were cheap and not really good, and they were nearly all a success because people loved El Santo that much. The reason it wouldn't make a good movie is because we don't know a lot about him. I mean, obviously a lot of his family went on to be wrestlers, but it's basically just like, this guy is a great wrestler and everything was great. there's not any controversy there. It doesn't make for a great story. You could definitely do a great movie about Mexico with El Santo, heavily featured. But just about him, it feels like I don't entirely know what would be worth investing in there. And again, some of these I knew about already. I've done a good bit of research on a few of them. I've skimmed a few other people, and they just didn't see it. El Santo was one I thought would make the list, to be honest, but he didn't in the end, just because there isn't much there to that story. As much as he had a long career, as much as he had a very interesting career, as much as he was a larger-than-life figure in Mexico, not a lot there, quite frankly. Kurt Angle, really, this is one that I think could be a good movie if you did, but again, it is quite recent, so it's hard to tell. To go from, an Olympic gold medalist into the world of professional wrestling and be one of the best to ever do it, you of course have the kind of fall down of, drug abuse and eventually kind of a comeback, which kind of, follows a standard kind of structure and projection of story arcs. And we'll get into stories in a minute. Mick Foley is another one, legendary hardcore icon. It's another one where his career is amazing, bigger than life. Mick Foley comes off as a great guy. What the actual story would it be though? Would it the truth is, like, you see biopics sometimes, and some of them are really successful, some of them are really good, some of them are really bad. But there aren't that many good biopics that are just like, this is his life. There needs to be conflict and drama and that kind of thing. And Mick Foley, the drama would be a lot of the time stemming from the injuries he takes. And that's just kind of sad. There's not much in that, really. And thankfully, he's a bit better off lately, seemingly. But obviously, he has had some issues through the wrestling, and it's not really. You'd have to delve really deep into his psyche, I think, to get a good movie out of that. Terry Funk is a character that's kind of interesting. Again, another character that'd be very interesting to dig into. Why he's been wrestling for so long, why he can't stop. Legendary wrestling figure, but again, not much controversy. He seems to be a good family man. Which I can't believe I'm like, oh, he's a good family guy. Ugh. I just mean you want to have someone that has a bit of a story to them. It's not like so many wrestler stories are just I grew up, I became an amazing wrestler, and I had a great life. That's fantastic. I wish there was more of them, because wrestling can be a very dark and seedy industry at times. But it doesn't make for a good movie necessarily. And again, you need to find a perfect balance there. No one wants, we don't want a movie about Chris Benoit. I don't want a movie about New Jack. People that are kind of violent, horrible people, seemingly. I shouldn't have said New Jack is still alive. He could fucking hear this. You don't want clean cut people. You don't want someone with shades of both. That's what makes it interesting characters. Jerry Lawler, legendary figure in Memphis, could make a good movie, but again, he's had such a legendary career, and he has such longevity. But what is the story? I think like the most interesting thing you could write about a story is about the Andy Kaufman stuff, and that's been covered in Man on the Moon already. So I don't know. Bruno Sammartino, one of the best wrestlers of all time. The only thing I think like it's tough again, because Bruno Sammartino, amazing figure in wrestling, long career, one of the longest reigning champs ever. But again, had a very straightforward life in some ways. There's not much controversy there. Most interesting thing about him actually is his upbringing. His mother, he was born in Italy, and he was in the mountains during World War II with his mother, who kind of kept him hidden in the mountains to keep him safe. His mother actually had to sneak into Italian villages that were Nazi occupied, I believe, or not Nazi occupied, but Axis occupied, I guess, and steal food and stuff, which is very fascinating. And he eventually got to, I think it was Pennsylvania, with his mother. And he came in with no English. People mocked him because of his appearance, because he was quite skinny, because he'd been raised on, rations of food. And he got insulted for it, and because of that he decided to, get strong and put on muscle and become the best, and that's very interesting. But, that's only a tiny bit of a much longer story. It's actually kind of interesting. When I was listening to this, I was like, this sounds very much like the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger, actually. And as it turns out, when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, Arnold Schwarzenegger introduced him. Introduced is like being interrupted to introduce someone. Like if I was about to start this podcast and someone just bursts into the room and goes, it's Tompott, that would be an introduced. Okay, there you go, I'm coining words. That wasn't a mess up. How dare you? Mildred Burke, legendary figure among female wrestling. She is a very inspirational figure that unfortunately kind of got, shut out of having a real long career, which I think is probably damaging. And some people, you might probably never heard some of these names. Some of these are very golden age wrestling, but a lot of the great stories are there because wrestling was in its infancy and it wasn't as commercial or sanitized as it is now. But she was a female wrestler starting off, and she basically, I don't think there were many female wrestlers there at that time. And she went to a wrestling training school, and he was like, "Oh, I kind of, you don't look like you're up to much. You're a woman. I don't know if I can train you." And they were like, "We're going to get a man to body slam her to kind of scare her away," and she body slammed the man. Way to go, Mildred. And she was very pivotal to women's wrestling. I think she trained a lot of women in wrestling. And she had an issue where I think the promoter and the trainer ended up being her husband. They had a nasty divorce, and she got blocked out of wrestling for a long, long time. And seemingly got screwed over for a belt down the road. And because of that, she didn't really have as much impact on the industry as she could have. And, she did, of course, have an impact. That's very insulting for me to say that. But what I just mean is that her story could have developed into more, but it sort of just peters out. And again, that doesn't necessarily make for a great movie. So those are honourable mentions, movies we have, movies we apparently are getting. Now I'm going to talk about the wrestlers I want to see have biopics. In looking at some of these characters to make movies about, I looked a lot at story structure and what it would mean, whether or not there was enough for a beginning, a middle, and end, that kind of thing. Obviously, that's the basic structure, a 3-act structure, a beginning, middle, end, whatever. I went a bit further than that. We, of course, have the hero's journey is probably generally a very famous kind of story arc. Generally, it's suited more to myths and kind of legends. I found that was a little bit weighty for a biopic. So I kind of moved on from that. And I instead landed at two kind of general structures of what they should have. We have, of course, the most basic one is the rags to riches story, in which our poor protagonist acquires power, wealth, and or a mate, loses it all, gains it back, growing as a person as a result. And there are a few stories that will follow that. The other one is a dramatic structure put forward by Gustav Freytag, who was a German novelist and playwright, I think. And he did this a lot when he studied, classical dramas. And his was basically done in 5 acts, which was the introduction, the rise, the climax, the return or fall, and the resolution or revelation. So it's kind of, general speaking, a character arc. Your character starts at one point, they go up, they reach a point where they're at their height, they fall down, and eventually the character arc is resolved. Presumably they learn something from it, or they learn some deeper truth. So that's what we're looking for, basically. I'm going to go into detail about most of these, but I kind of have 6. These are 2 that I'm not going to go into detail on too much because I think people are well aware of their stories and what they work. And I'm also, I think in most cases, I might be able to recommend, some form of media, be it a documentary or something like that, if you want to hear more about their story. So the first 2 are, guys, I'm not going into detail on too much. I have more detail on the other ones, but I think it's because these stories are a bit better known, and that is Bret Hart and Andre the Giant. I kind of tied there at number 5. Bret Hart, the reason I couldn't really do one on him, I think, one of the drawbacks of that might be that, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be a kind of a rise. It's like, or not a rise, there is a rise, but it seems like it's been fall, mostly for Bret Hart, because a lot of bad news has befallen the poor man. And so Bret Hart, Canadian wrestler, probably one of the best of all time, very great technical wrestler. So in the film you get to see the Hart Dungeon, the one of the most toughest wrestling academies in the world, apparently. And then from there, what would you see? You'd get to see his legendary rivalry with Shawn Michaels, which would be great on film. And of course, culminating in the Montreal Screwjob, which again, debate about what exactly happened, but seemingly he was screwed out of his title. They took the title from him. And that line, I think, between, as I said, reality and fiction is something that really makes a good wrestling movie. And that is probably the ultimate example of where that line is blurred in modern wrestling. So it would be great to have that, in a film. Now, the problem is that things after that kind of just get worse, rather unfortunately. From there, his brother dies, Owen Hart, tragically. he eventually takes enough injuries, gets concussed, that he has to retire. So many of the people he loves has died. You know, Jim the Anvil Neidhart for one. Obviously, he lost his brother. He battled cancer and he survived that. So there is some goodness there in that he beat cancer, but the fact he had cancer at all to begin with, that's kind of bad enough. If there was a possible, like the closest one I can think of to, you know, positive outcome is that his niece, Natalia, wrestles now. You could see something there, but I think there's a better example of that further on down the list. But yeah, I think that's like his story is well known. It's just I don't know what period of his life you would cover to frame it as a. And look, not every film has to have a happy ending, obviously, but it's just be kind of a downer, unfortunately. Andre the Giant is one I could definitely see working as a biopic, because Andre is a very much, you know, no pun intended, he's a larger than life figure. He always came across as a very sweet man, and any stories about him are always very lovely, you know. And you know, you have this kind of charming, you know, gentle giant story. You know, I think he went to school with, or he got dropped to rugby training by Samuel Beckett, I think, or dropped to school, I think it was, by Samuel Beckett. So you have kind of interesting stories like that. His legendary drinking stories, of course, you know, famously drank a crazy amount of alcohol. I can't even remember the numbers. It's something insane. So you have that kind of urban legend side of him, and you also have the, you know, the more tender side to him. He had a you know, a wife, he had a child, he had a daughter. People weren't necessarily aware about. He was incredibly famous. There's stories about him on the Princess Bride, where Robin Wright Penn, I think it was, well, Robin Wright, I guess now, you know, was freezing cold, and he would just put his hand on her head to warm her up. You know, there's a lot of sweetness there, and of course, you know, unfortunately, he passes away. But again, whether or not I don't know what the real character arc or story would be there, aside from just this is his career, and quite frankly, I feel like that's already been done quite well, and that's why I'm going to recommend two forms of media. For the Bret Hart, I would say there's Wrestling with Shadows, probably most notably, but there's also a great episode of a documentary series that Vice did called Dark Side of the Ring that you can check out on the Montreal Screwjob, which is, you know, both of those are pretty conclusive, which are fantastic. And as far as Andre the Giant goes, HBO put a documentary out last year that I think is conclusive. I don't think you need to make an Andre the Giant movie, and I had heard talks about one based on a graphic novel. I can't remember what it's called. I have it somewhere. I think it might just be called Andre the Giant. But yeah, it feels like it's been done. So the next 4 options I'm going to go on into a bit more detail on, and yeah, some of them some of them might be a bit dark, but I think there's more here. Some of them might be well known, but I think there's more here to develop a movie around. And first one I'm going to start with is probably the least well known on the list, and that is a guy called Sputnik Monroe. Now, he's not well known for his wrestling. In fact, it's really his story is more his stance on race that made him an interesting subject for a biopic. See, at a time of segregation, the white Monroe did many things to wind up the white crowds. And this was in Memphis in the 50s and 60s. Wrestling was sort of in a bit of a decline in Memphis at this time, and segregation was expected at public events. Sputnik used this racism from white fans to get heat. And just in case you're not a wrestling fan, heat means them to hate you. Because if you're a bad guy, and this is, I might as well throw these terms in now, all these smarky terms. If you're a good guy, you're a babyface. If you're a bad guy, you're a heel. Heels want to get heat. In other words, heels want to get them to hate you. If they're doing something that will make you hate them, they're getting heat. Okay? There we go. That's just in case you haven't any idea about wrestling terms. So he did that to get heat. For example, he once arrived at an event with a black driver. He was hitchhiking, I think, and he got tired. And the black driver actually agreed to drive him. And when he got out, he put his arm around and hugged him, which people booed. And then he kissed him on the cheek to even more boos. So really playing off people's racism to make them hate him. What could be seen as a gimmick actually seemed more genuine on his part, though. He drank at black bars, promoting his shows while talking to patrons in what was considered a blacks-only area of Memphis. And this often got him actually in trouble with the law. He got arrested for some bogus charges. I think mopery was one of them. You know, general just kind of laws that they were only doing to get him out of these areas. And when he had to face these charges, he hired black legal representation to dispute the charges. And then as soon as that was done, he'd pay his fine and go back to the same areas. The guy was a bit of a legend when it came to civil rights in Memphis. He's actually seen as a sort of not a folk hero, but an important part of civil rights in Memphis in that regard. Due to this, he was seen as a heel, as we said, a bad guy, by white people, and a face by black people, the good guy. At shows, the floor seating was for white folk, and while the balconies were for African Americans, the balconies would be more full than the floors. And they were all cheering for Sputnik, even though to most people, or to white people, he was seen as the bad guy. Wrestling was sort of in a decline, as I said already, but Monroe had found himself as the biggest draw in that territory because so many African Americans were coming out to see him. Because to them, he was a hero. He was breaking down the walls of segregation. Now, and as I said, there could be some ulterior motive, ticket sales, money, and all that kind of thing, but he genuinely didn't seem to have any problems with that. He went to bars and chatted with patrons, talked to them, was comfortable around African Americans, as it should be. And as a result of that, he got to the point where he was so big in his territory that he refused to perform unless, regardless of race, people could sit where they wanted. And they actually did it, because they eventually saw that that would help attendance. There would be more people. And as a result of this, eventually arenas that ended up being filled, and other sports associations and sporting events in Memphis started to desegregate when they saw the financial benefits. So it's a really interesting story. He's a really interesting wrestler. Why would it make a good movie? I mean, that does not sound like an Oscar movie. The Academy loves nothing more than a white savior movie, than the white guy coming in and saving all this, basically being like, here's how we fix civil rights. And this is a very interesting story. And, you know, considering this is in Memphis in the 50s and 60s, is really ahead of its time. But also, I think it's the kind of, he was a very over the top flamboyant character, so it's very interesting from that regard. But yeah, that's a very interesting story. I think that would make a really good movie. I had heard at one stage that HBO were going to make a movie about it, but that was a long, long time ago, and I've heard nothing since. So Sputnik Monroe, that's my first nomination for a wrestling biopic, or I guess my second if you want to count Bret Hart and Andre the Giant. Next one is, we're going to go from probably not well known to one of the most well known wrestlers of all time, and that is Ric Flair. Now, I'm not going to go through Ric Flair's career because we'd be here all day, quite frankly. One of the most decorated wrestlers of all time. He's worked everywhere, won basically every title. He's eclipsed wrestling to being a pop culture symbol, an icon, adored by the sporting and hip hop community. One of the four horsemen, the styling, profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling, dealing, son of a gun. Woo! That was awful. The best pro wrestler of all time. I would say definitely. Certainly in the conversation and on a very short list for that title. And we can talk about his accomplishments all day, but at heart, we're going to look at a bit of a darker side of Ric Flair. Because really, when you get down to it, Ric Flair is a man of excess. And the question of where that line is between Richard Flair and Ric Flair is blurred, maybe more than any other wrestler I can think of. And we talked about why I think a good movie needs to be about where that line, you know, differs, where the reality ends and the fictional begins, and vice versa. Ric Flair seemed to live that parody all the time. He's, the expensive sexual life of luxury. It's even carried over to his wrestling in that he's a man that doesn't seem to know when enough is enough. There's a kind of a common phrase you hear people say about wrestling when it's that when people are coming up with their gimmicks, it's, their own personality dialed up to 11. Ric Flair, it seems like nothing has turned up. That's the real man at times. The drive to be the man, to be Ric Flair, made him the best wrestler ever. Despite being told he didn't have it, despite breaking his back in a plane crash and being told he never wrestled again, he persevered. That drive is there. But the dark side of that coin is that he had to be Ric Flair, the Ric Flair we all know and love. He was away from his family and his wives. He was living that lifestyle. It cost him time with his kids. It cost him marriage. It cost him health. All these parts of his lifestyle caught up with him. He's a man who didn't know how to stop. In his professional life, he was given a massive perfect send-off at WrestleMania. but he couldn't quit, and he returned to the ring for TNA, which he has said is the biggest regret of his career. And in his personal life, he couldn't face, he couldn't face the end of his wrestling career, but in his personal life, in his own words, and I will tell you the source for this after, he says he was too busy being a friend and being a father to his son Reed. People said that his son, it wasn't like he was spending time with his dad, it was like he was partying with Ric Flair, the Nature Boy. And while Rick managed to survive a life of excess, his son did not. His son died of a drug overdose. It's heartbreaking. The light at the end of the tunnel here is that Rick has been able to see the dream his son wanted in his daughter, who's now breaking glass ceilings in the WWE as Charlotte Flair, even being a part of her story. His wrestling legacy has really lived on through her. And if she hadn't come along, who knows if Ric Flair would possibly still be wrestling. But it seems like he's able to somewhat live on through seeing his daughter perform. Now, some of that might sound very dramatic, some of it might sound very personal. A lot of that is touched upon in a really great documentary that got really overlooked, actually, because the Andre the Giant one came out. But ESPN do these 30 for 30s. They're really good. Then they get 30 directors to talk 30 subjects. They did one last year, I believe it was, on the Nature Boy Ric Flair, which is fantastic. Just call the Nature Boy. If you can find it, check it out. Where he gets really, really candid. And he basically touches on this himself, that he was living the lavish lifestyle of Ric Flair, and he kind of couldn't turn it off, to the point that his son in some ways didn't really have a father. He said that he was acting more as a friend when he should have been a father, and because of that he lost his son. And it feels like when we're talking about character arcs, you have the high highs of Ric Flair being one of the most decorated, successful wrestlers of all time, to the point where people are questioning whether he's damaging his career at this point, to the point where he loses his son, to the point where he's wrestling even though people thought he was gone, and that people think he's embarrassing himself, to the point of he's had health issues because of the amount of alcohol and whatever else. There's a lot of lows there, but the eventual high is that he gets to see his legacy live on with Charlotte Flair's daughter, and he said very much so that that's kind of healed that hole in him, seeing her perform and carry on his legacy. And it's obviously something that his son wanted. In fact, Charlotte has said that really she didn't have as much interest in being a wrestler as Reed did. So it's there is some bittersweetness there. I think that would make a really good arc. As I said, the problem is that Ric Flair has had such a massive career. He's been going for so long. It's a question of where do you start, where do you end? There's a lot of stuff there. But yes, I would definitely say check out that 30 for 30. That's the best you're going to get right now, I would say. We talked a little bit about Antonio Inoki and why I don't think he should get a movie. But I'm going to tell you why I think this might be the better call as far as Japanese wrestling icons to get a movie. And I also talked about El Santo in Mexico, and this is basically, if there's anyone who has a claim to being a bigger wrestler as far as fame and cultural influence goes, it's probably Ricky Dozan. One of the biggest influences on Japanese wrestling, known as the father of Puroresu, which is Japanese for professional wrestling. Ricky Dozan was actually born in Korea, the youngest son to a farming family. His father died when he was 15, and Ricky Dozan cared for him till his death. Ricky Dozan actually dreamed of being a sumo wrestler. And when he finally went, he actually lied about his ethnicity and said he was Japanese, adapting the name of a family that had actually disowned him. He was very successful as a sumo wrestler, but he gave up in 1950. And while he was said it was for financial reasons, a lot of people pointed it to the fact that Koreans were often discriminated against. And that could have been a reason. The following year, he began wrestling. And since this was only a short time after World War II, he was massively over as a good guy for defeating American wrestlers. At a time when Americans were still somewhat hated, at a time where America still had some involvement in Japan, having a Japanese person, or seemingly Japanese person, to stand behind and cheer was a very big deal. For that reason alone, he was a massive figure in Japan because there weren't many people they could get behind to fight the Americans, but Rikidozan was one of them, even if it was only in a somewhat fictional setting. He was the good Japanese guy fighting against the Americans. In fact, what's even more surprising is Rikidozan did occasionally wrestle in America, and while he was a bad guy initially, he was also one of the first Japanese wrestlers to get cheered in America. He gained notoriety when he won the likes of the NWA International Heavyweight Championship against the legendary wrestler Lou Thesz, but he also fought for other American titles against the likes of Classy Freddie Blassie. He trained wrestlers as well, probably most notably is Giant Baba, but more noteworthy is someone we mentioned earlier, Antonio Inoki. He also established the first ever Japanese wrestling promotion with Japanese Pro Wrestling Alliance. And if you want to talk about cultural significance, the 10 most watched programs in all time in Japan, 2 of those are Rikidozan matches. In fact, they say the increase in wanting colour televisions in the country is said to be a result of people wanting to see those matches. He was a massive celebrity in Japan, though. He eclipsed wrestling to just be famous, with some people claiming that people might not know the name of the Prime Minister, but everyone knows the name of Rikidozan. He appeared often in tabloids and even movies, but didn't necessarily have a clean-cut image. There was a certain degree of controversy after he revealed he was actually from Korea, but also that the woman he called his wife was not his first wife and that he had kids in his previous marriage, which was a massive taboo in Japanese culture. He was also a boozer and a brawler, and could be seen drinking after his matches still covered in blood, often with people that he had been fighting in the ring with earlier, which raised some eyebrows about the legitimacy of the sport. But anyone who questioned it would often face an actual fight from Rikidozan, who was undoubtedly a tough man. In fact, this hard fighting, hard drinking reputation will contribute to his death. One night while out drinking, he got in a confrontation with a man who he claimed stepped on his shoe. This man was a member of the Yakuza gang. When the man refused to apologise, they argued and the man pulled a knife. Rikidozan tried to calm the man, but failing to do so, he got in a fight, punching him repeatedly and got stabbed in the abdomen. After going to the hospital and undergoing surgery, Rikidozan was seemingly on the mend. He even was visited by the attacker and the boss of the Yakuza gang, and they bowed their heads and accepted responsibility, but Rikidozan forgave them. That's right, even the mob bows to Rikidozan. After he went against doctor's orders and started drinking again, he needed more surgery, and eventually it caused an inflammation of his abdominal organs and he died at age 39. That's right, this whole time he's only been up to the age of 39. That's how much of an impact and legacy he had in such a short time. Over 12,000 people attended his funeral, and the man who killed Rikidozan was riddled with remorse, and after an 8-year jail sentence would visit his grave and apologise to his sons yearly, and would eventually become a noteworthy member of the Yakuza. His legacy on Japanese wrestling was shown in his sons who pursued wrestling, and probably more notably his students. Antonio Inoki went on to found New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Baba went on to form All Japan Pro Wrestling, who are both still active and thriving in Japan today. So Rikidozan, as I said, probably one of the biggest cultural milestones as far as wrestling goes. Massive in Japan. Had a fame that eclipsed it. There's controversy there. There's, a dark side there. And the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, the great thing that comes out of it is that you see his impact directly on Japanese wrestling, and that the 2 biggest Japanese wrestling promotions are founded by his students. So yeah, very interesting figure, and probably very suited to a movie. I believe he does actually have, I think I only found out about this after, that his Korean movie about Rikidozan that's already been made, but again, not entirely sure how you get your hands on it or if it's any good, but it exists apparently. This is our last story that I think is suited to a movie, and it's a little bit dark, but I think it is suited to a movie, and I think that there is some degree of a happy ending, even though there's so much darkness it's hard to get past. But the story of the Von Erich family, probably well known to wrestling fans or wrestling historians. The Von Erichs were a southern wrestling, dynasty. They were often in the shadow of the supposed Von Erich curse, which I think will become quite evident as we go on. Fritz Von Erich was the patriarch of the family, and he was a major name in the NWA territories, and founded his very own successful wrestling promotion, World Class Championship Wrestling. He was also quite influential in Japan. Actually, speaking of Rikidozan, after his death, Fritz really helped with Inoki and Baba to get the Japanese wrestling scene back on its feet. Fritz and his wife Doris had 6 sons, and tragedy beset the Von Erich family very early on, when their first son Jack died at the age of 6 from a freak accident, when he was electrocuted to the point of unconsciousness by an exposed wire and ended up drowning in a puddle. Fritz von Erich was a very domineering man, and the questions of whether he put his role as a father or as a promoter first is often debated. All of Fritz's sons would become wrestlers and celebrities in Texas and beyond, and he ordered them to maintain a certain image, the Christian, non-drinking, single men from Texas, all of which was simply not true. They were often hard drinking and hard partying, and even at times they were married and still told to tell people they were single. The Von Erich boys were the heartthrobs of the Texas heartland, and it was easy to see why. They were young, athletic, good-looking, and seemed to uphold to the strong values of the South in Texas. They wrestled for their father's promotion, and they were major stars, feuding with the likes of Gino Hernandez, Ric Flair, and most famously, the fabulous Freebirds. As most stories about fame and success go, though, the trappings of a lavish lifestyle often catch up, and Doris and Fritz would lose another son, David, at 25 years old. David was seen as the breakout of the Von Erich family. He even defeated NWA champion Harley Race in a non-title bout and wrestled in Madison Square Garden. He was expected to win the NWA title from Ric Flair, but while on a tour of Japan, David passed away. Now, his death has long been questioned, with the family claiming it was due to ruptured intestines, while many wrestlers, including the likes of Ric Flair and Mick Foley, attest it was in fact a drug overdose. Now, perhaps the Von Erich didn't want the image of a wholesome Texas boy to be tarnished, but regardless, it was another sad loss for the Von Erich family. It somewhat shattered the Von Erich family. David was considered the great one, and after his death, Mike Von Erich took his place, alongside his brother Kerry. Mike had very little ambition about being a wrestler, and instead he wanted to be a cameraman for his father's promotion, presumably being driven to wrestle from parental pressure. Mike felt an overwhelming pressure to be like his brother David, and it tormented him. He simply wasn't as skilled or adored as his brother. Not many could have been, and it no doubt haunted him and put a grave responsibility on his shoulders. The mantle of Von Erich and the hopes of impressing his father was just too much. After becoming ill while on a wrestling tour, he suffered brain damage, which only hampered his ability further, and he would take his life less than 2 years later. Half the Von Erich boys were now dead, leaving only 3: Chris, Kerry, and Kevin. Chris was the youngest Von Erich, and while Mike had never wanted to be a wrestler, that was all that Chris wanted. While he had some support and admiration from fans, he simply wasn't as athletic or gifted as his brothers. He was a lot shorter, for one, and not as well built, and that's not to mention the asthma or brittle bones he got. He simply wasn't meant to be a wrestler. The death of Mike hurled him into depression and drug use, and he would commit suicide at 21 years old. If there was a Von Erich who had taken up the position of the breakout Von Erich after David's death, it would have been Kerry. Kerry had a very distinguished and successful career, most notably probably capturing the NWA title from Ric Flair, what his brother would likely have done had he not died, and doing so actually at a memorial to David no less. He joined the WWF, now the WWE, and wrestled under the name of the Texas Tornado, while they still acknowledged him as a prestigious member of the Von Erich family. He beat Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental Championship, however that would be the highlight of his time there. While he did manage to face Ric Flair once again in the WWF, he became less consistent in appearing for them. By the early 90s, he was often not on TV and his marriage had fallen apart, and after being left off of SummerSlam in 1992, he left. A lot of his issues, and possibly even the collapse of his marriage, has stemmed from a motorcycle accident in 1986. While he kept it a secret from fans and most wrestlers, the accident had meant that Kerry had his leg amputated. He relied heavily on painkillers and drugs, and felt that he was meant to join his brothers in heaven. In 1993, Kerry Von Erich took his own life. Fritz witnessed the death of all but one of his sons before he died of cancer from 1987. The last remaining Von Erich is Kevin Von Erich. While he never achieved the heights of his brothers, David or Kerry, he did win many titles in both the NWA and his father's promotion WCCW. When WCCW became defunct, Kevin even tried to revive it, but to not much success. He now lives in Hawaii and is, aside from some sporadic appearances, retired. But the legacy of the Von Erich family lives on in his 2 sons, who are both now professional wrestlers, and even managed to wrestle alongside them at a show in Israel in 2017. Regardless of anything like success or legacy of the Von Erichs, he seems to be the only one to have escaped the so-called Von Erich curse. Now, it's a very dark story, the story of the Von Erichs, as I just said. 5 of the 6 Von Erichs died, often due to suicide or freak accident, unfortunately. It's basically a story of the trappings of fame, the dangers of the wrestling business, and, putting it before being a parent. Fritz put his sons in positions they possibly shouldn't have been in. Some of them had no ambitions about being wrestlers. So there's a certain question of whether he was responsible. And there's something that a story Kerry Von Erich, the last remaining Von Erich, tells, where he says the revolver that Kerry used to take his life, he got it from Fritz, and Fritz gives the revolver to to Kevin, who was the last one alive, and said, if you were any sort of man, you'd join your brothers. And Kevin told him that it took more guts to be here than to take his own life. So he undoubtedly put too much pressure on his sons, and it likely led to their demise, as most, if not all of them, felt inadequate or had little interest in wrestling before being pushed towards it, and to live up to the lofty expectations of their father and the legacy of the Von Erich family. It's fascinating, and again, I don't know if it's, like I said, there is a somewhat positive ending, but it is so sad. If there is a positive ending, it's of course that Kevin and the Von Erich family get to live on, and bring the Von Erichs are still in wrestling with seemingly a better influence of a father in Kevin Von Erich. And I think the ultimate legacy seems to be that Kevin, who was the last remaining one, obviously, kind of realized he had to move out of the shadow of his father, that he didn't have to be Fritz Von Erich's son. He could be the first Kevin Von Erich. He tried to do he tried to relaunch his father's promotion and failed, and realized that maybe he shouldn't be trying to carry on his father's legacy and forge his own one out in Hawaii with his sons. And eventually he gets to fight alongside them, just like his father would have done with the other Von Erichs, and hopefully with a better result. So yeah, those are my suggestions for good wrestling biopics. As far as what if you wanted to hear more about the Von Erichs, there's a lot of stuff out there. Dark Side of the Ring did one on the last of the Von Erichs, or the Von Erich family. There's a short 30 for 30 called The Last of the Von Erichs, I believe. There's a special on the WWE Network, I can't remember but it's down under WCCW, which I think is like about 2 hours long. So there's no shortage of information of articles, because it's one of the saddest stories in wrestling, and it's really a story about the dangers of this industry, of parental influence, of fame and its trappings in general. So that's the topic. It's not always going to be this much of a downer. Generally, it's more of an essay on certain things. It's not often they've done kind of lists like this. But I figured if you're listening to this, you're probably a wrestling fan, because this is a course on the Phoenix Wrestling Network now, which is pretty cool. So I want to do something wrestling related. It won't always be this wrestling related, I guarantee that. If you're someone who has listened to podcasts before and now you're sucked into this world of wrestling, it's not always going to be wrestling related. Most of the time it's going to stick to what it is. But we are going to do something in a new segment that we're going to introduce that will make sure that it belongs on the Phoenix Wrestling Network, which is going to be a segment called
It's that time of the week where Tompott justifies his place on the Phoenix Wrestling Network.
That's right, it's that time of the week where I justify my place on the Phoenix Wrestling Network. What does that involve? I definitely earned my keep this week. A lot of wrestling talk this week. But it means I go to randomcelebritygenerator.com, which is exactly what it sounds like. And I have to make a link between that celebrity and wrestling. Okay? Aside from that, what happens if I don't get it? Haven't really thought that far ahead, to be honest. I cut a promo. I don't know. I get chopped by someone. Like just some random person on the street. I don't know. Or maybe I get kicked off the network. Maybe that's legally binding now I said it. So I'm pressing random 3 times, and whoever comes up. I would say as well, like I was looking at the site earlier. It has to be someone actually, that I can use. There's no point getting someone from history. Just someone that's been in film, TVs, or I guess video games. Okay. I've got an actor here that I've never heard of. But it gives like a very brief description. So Bill Nunn, who is an actor. Apparently he was Lieutenant Eddie Souther in Sister Act, and he played Robbie Robertson in Spider-Man. So if he was in Spider-Man, I'll take your word of it. And actually, I do think I recognize him now, actually, from Spider-Man. Okay, well, he was in Spider-Man. So was Randy Savage. That was really easy. Oh, that's kind of I'd say that's a disappointment, but I'm worried that if I push too far, I'm going to get one. So I guess I've justified my existence on the Phoenix Network this week. I'm sure it'll be more difficult next week. Oh, that only would have been easier if I had just gotten Randy Savage. But hey, that is the way it is. Disagree with some of my hot takes, or did I make some mistakes? Feel free to let me know. You can get me on Instagram, PopCultPod, Twitter @pop_cult_pod. You can go to Facebook and join the Pop Cult Compound. That's all you got to do. Where else? I mean, you can email me if you want. Yes, popcultpod@gmail.com. Regardless, wherever you're listening to this, please give it a positive review. Be sure to follow the Phoenix Wrestling Network. They're putting out some great stuff. Very exciting to see what comes from there. And yeah, it's a bit of a long show this week. Apologies for that. Oh, listen, Mark, I'm sorry. Are you around next week? It was a long episode. I didn't have time for you, I know. But all right, chill. Jesus. Have a Snickers. You're not yourself when you're hungry, babe.
Shout out to Gunkel for our music. Check him out, soundcloud.com/GUNKEL. Peace.
The Phoenix Wrestling Network. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcast.